president of the Children's Media Association, and I'd like to get into tonight's panel. First of all, I'd like to give a shout out to all of our wonderful members who are joining us today. Thank you. And if you're not a member, please consider joining CMA. We are the only industry organization that works across all media verticals in the kids and family space. Collectively and individually, we seek to inspire industry excellence. We understand the privilege and the responsibility we share as the creative community shaping the minds and hearts of our children and therefore our future. CMA is a nonprofit volunteer-run organization, and we're always looking for new members to step up and get involved and join the global team or regional team. If you're interested, please check us out through our website. All right, so let's get going. This panel is called Emotional Ingredients of Quality Content. George and I met almost a year ago now, George, almost, I guess 9 months ago or so. And I was really taken with the presentation that George did because I spent my career building global franchises and figuring out that emotional connection between an intellectual property and a consumer. So what George spoke to was really my language. And if anyone knows me, I love data, ex-Netflix, all of that stuff. And it was just like, oh, another data point I can pull into this whole relationship. And I just thought, as we look at the landscape of how best to support our members, I thought this was really important information that the members would really love to dive into and to better understand, because we're all looking, as we develop media, those different connection points with either our target demographic or the emotional quality that the media puts out there that kids and families connect with. So that's why we're all joined together tonight here. So let me introduce the panelists that we have. I'm going to read their bios, so bear with me as I go through this. I'm going to get everyone's credits correct. George Carey is the president and CEO of The Family Room, a marketing intelligence company that turns consumer emotion into data. At the heart of George's work is his company's Passion Points construct, the industry's leading tracker of consumer sentiment, grounded in the belief that consumers make choices with their hearts and their minds. Passion Points delivers the world's only consistent and reliable measures of the emotional priorities that drive consumer choice. Covering 4 generational cohorts, 9 markets, and 80,000 respondents annually, Passion Points replaces theory with facts on emotional triggers. 10 years of longitudinal tracking provide clarity on where consumers are headed and how to stay relevant in today's fast-paced world. Leading brands such as Lego, McDonald's, Google, and Pepsi, and Nickelodeon, we'll get to that point, use Passion Points construct to guide their relevance and growth strategies. Alyssa Schraier is a former special education teacher and school social worker. She worked in elementary, middle, and high school in Chicago. In addition, Alyssa worked for the Chicago Public Schools in their central office, where she supported a network of alternative high schools as they established and strengthened their multi-tiered systems of support for students' social, emotional, and behavioral development. Alyssa holds a Bachelor's of Science from the School of Education at the University of Michigan, a Master's of Arts in Teaching from the National Louis University, a Master of Art. Wow, this is a lot, Alyssa. Congratulations. A Master of Arts in Social Service Administration from the University of Chicago. Alyssa currently works for the Urban Assembly as a social emotional learning program manager, where she coaches schools and districts seeking to create systems and structures necessary to implement quality SEL. And we also have with us the wonderful Andrea Strauss, Senior Vice President of Brand and Content Insights at Nickelodeon. Andrea serves as an in-house expert on the lifestyles, attitudes, and behaviors of kids, teens, young adults, and parents. She is responsible for the development of domestic and international consumer insights research in support of stakeholders across the company. Andrea has spent more than 2 decades informing the work of Nickelodeon's production, consumer products, public affairs, marketing, and location-based experience groups. She has been a chief architect throughout leadership studies such as Nickelodeon's Shades of Us, a study of race, identity, and American family. Her content-focused research has played a key role in the development of some of Nick's biggest franchises, including SpongeBob, Dora, Blue's Clues, and many more. Most recently, Andrea led work on the Bridging the Gap, a deep examination of content that resonates with the 4 to 7-year-old audience. And Andrea left. In all transparency, she didn't like how I did that. No, I'm teasing. In all transparency, Andrea is a client of the Family Room. So let's get started. George, tell us how not only the Family Room began, but how this focus on sentiment began, and how then we'll go into the current research that you're going to share with us.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. We were kind of joking about this, but I've been kind of very interested in the topic of consumer emotion for a long time. One of the things that I've always been intrigued with is like, what's really going on when we make choices? Like, it's not usually what it looks like on the surface, particularly when you think about how irrational so many of our choices are. Like, there's absolutely no good reason for so many of the choices that we do if you apply a logical lens. There's no way you should be spending this much money on a pair of sneakers or this much money on whatever it is for your kid. But somehow you do it anyway. You keep finding reasons to do that. And that's, I think it's just a sort of a testament that we kind of have over and over again in our daily lives, that there's an emotional component to our choices that, is just below the surface. It may not be visible all the time, but it's there. And it springs out and sort of guides our choices, pretty much everywhere we go. As an adult, it guides our choices on what we watch at television. It guides our choice of what kind of snacks we buy. It certainly guides our choice when we walk into a voting booth. I think most of us would agree that it's getting pretty crazy out there on the political front, but there's just not a lot of rational thought being applied to that. And I think that's just the way it's always been. Some people kind of would sort of think of this as being in the world of behavioral economics. Others refer to it as system one thinking. Right. But it's the same basic idea, which is what are those deeper seated emotional needs that define our choices? And the basic premise on which our company is built is that before you are a media viewer or before you are a consumer of Doritos or whatever else, you're a person, you're a human being. And to begin your attempt to understand consumer behavior based in the category that you're in or the brand that you work on, is overlooking the most fundamental aspect of like, what is the raw reality of what it means to be a 9-year-old child today? At a human level, what are you carrying around with you in terms of these deeper emotional desires and fears and aspirations? And when you understand that, and when you can sort of reliably measure that, which is the whole mission of our company, a lot of stuff becomes clear. A lot of these behaviors that seem irrational and unpredictable and whatever else, it's like, oh, okay, now I begin to get that. So our whole purpose with Passion Points has been to turn those emotional priorities into data, because most of our clients are not going to turn the Nickelodeon brand promise around with 5, good response in a focus group in New Jersey with a bagel. You need more than that in order to make some of these choices, and that's where the data aspect of our work comes in handy. So that's the life story. I could go back earlier to when I was 7 and spare you that. But it's been bubbling up in me for a long time, and it's been a real adventure to build this data set.
Yeah, I know, a decade. We need to get into that decade of data. Come on. All right, so should we jump into your presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So this is the topic, as you have heard from Susie and from the advanced announcement of this, is quality content. We've been hearing this word quality content a lot for the last 2 years. Some people call it enriching content, some people call it quality content, but I think that in the simplest sense, this is like a higher bar than the usual shows that you let your kid watch. We expect more of a program which we sort of categorize as quality content. And there are really 2 reasons why we thought we could add something to this, because goodness knows there's plenty of experts out there already who know a lot and have much to add and much to offer in terms of what quality content is. If you go to the next page, Susan, the first reason was that we figured that it was time for a human lens on this. There's again, without being the least bit disrespectful, to the professional people in this space, because God knows they have a lot to offer. And most of the big media companies that produce preschool content have 2 or 3 or teams of them advising them. So without any disrespect to them whatsoever, I think there's a second piece to this, which is that as a parent, as the ultimate arbiter of what your 4-year-old is going to watch for the most part, what are your views on quality content? Like, what is that? What does it mean if you ask me from a parent? So it seems to us that when you put together, the perspective of a production showrunner and the perspective of a well-trained academic expert in child development, and the perspective of the moms and dads that are rearing these children, you get to a kind of a different place in terms of what this gold standard is for quality content. So that was the first reason we thought there was a reason for us to get into this. And the second one, if you go to the next page, is what I was just talking about.
One quick question, George. I think the other thing I'd love to add to that is that coming out of COVID, I feel parents are more knowledgeable, more involved in what their kids are watching and learning too. And I think that's why I was drawn to this research as well, in terms of that voice being strengthened probably more than ever before.
100%. You're 100% right. And then the other piece that we thought was a worthwhile contribution to this conversation was, again, not just a human lens, but the emotional lens. The whole intent of this is not to have moms and dads give us their rational top 10 things, but more the emotional things. What are the emotional rewards that they're looking for out of a program or a platform that they consider to be of high quality? And that's where our work comes in. Obviously, that's what we do. That's what the whole point of Passion Points are. As you heard a little bit, I won't kind of belabor this too much, but we study 105 of these priorities. And to be clear, when I say emotion, I'm not talking about anger, sadness, happiness, fear. I'm talking about emotional priorities. And we built this model around Maslow, the different levels of human decision making, which most people have no trouble understanding. And what you'll see is we have a number of different priorities for each one of Maslow's hierarchy of needs that we measure on a continuous basis. Once we had figured out what this model was about 10 years ago, we began to put it in the field every year, now every quarter, consistently, with no change whatsoever in how the questions are asked or what the items are in this model. The only variable in this is the world. The only variable in this is what's happened to this planet and the society and us as people over that time period. So you can see through this data exactly how changes in the world, the good and the bad, unfortunately mostly bad, I have to say, are changing who we are as people. And I'll tell you, one of the things that you sort of get religion on real quick when you do this kind of work is it does not take a generation for people to change.
Right.
When a bunch of people get killed in school, when a war breaks out, when a World Cup gets won, it's not all bad stuff, it's also good stuff. You can see that ripple through the emotional mindsets of people immediately. Mm-hmm. And the shift that we've seen in the last 5 years in the emotional priorities of moms and dads have far outpaced those that we've seen over the last 12 years. Mm-hmm. I mean, the rate of change in this it's a mind bender. So that's what Passion Points are. We're actually up to more respondents now, about 120,000 per year. We're up to 11 global markets, and we measure these at a category level also, as well as for the participants in this study, the subscribers. We put your brands in here, and from that you can see exactly the emotional why of your brands, as well as the emotional why nots of your brand. So those are the two sort of foundational points of this idea. Was number one, let's add the authentic voice of parents to the quality content conversation, and number two, let's speak to moms and dads' hearts as opposed to their heads where quality content is concerned.
Yeah.
So on to the next page, we'll sort of begin to get into some of these findings. Well, so this is a little bit of an eye chart. Sorry for this, but what you'll see off on the right hand part, those are passion points. And these are, and we pick them from throughout the Maslow model that we have. Some have to do with safety, some have to do with self-actualization, some have to do with love and affection. So there's a whole range of passion points that are into this mix of what moms and dads were invited to tell us were the most important emotional rewards for them for quality content. And what they were asked was, like, which of these is a must-have? Like, it's not quality without this. Which of these are nice to have, and which of these are not terribly important? So we began doing this research at the end of last year. We continued into this year, and we'll certainly continue into the coming years because it's changing. It's changing. This is a moving target, and you've got to stay ahead of it. So that was the foundation for the work that we did.
That's
So,
what I love, that you're sort of on the pulse of it. I mean,
yeah,
you can really see how when something happens, good or bad in the world, that you can really start to track how that impact is, to use your words, rippling across families and kids, and how they're reacting to it.
It's funny, not to get too much into this, but there's two ways to look at this data. The first is like, tell me what's changed. That's what most people want to know. Like, what's changing? I think as important is like, what's not changing?
Right.
Like, which of these emotional values are like so essential to who I am as a person that pandemics and plagues and political nonsense doesn't seem to have any impact on them. And we can see both of those things globally. In addition to like, what is it that unifies a kid or a parent in India, France, Brazil, and the US emotionally? We can do that instantly. So on to the next page, and this does begin to get a little bit into the foundational piece of this. As Susie said, there was a lot of good reasons for this now. One is there's just this explosion of preschool content being produced. The second is that we are seeing a bit of post-pandemic stabilization, so it's a good time to kind of recalibrate on some of these gold standards. And then the last one is we got to acknowledge the facts that Gen Z, who, I mean, most of us are still thinking, oh yeah, those are 17-year-olds. No, they're not. they're having kids, and there's enough of them now in our data set to be able to look at like what's shaping up for the future of parenthood. So if we go to the next page, let's start there. And in terms of what these Gen Z parents are, what you're looking at here are the biggest passion point differences between a Gen Z parent and a millennial parent in the U.S. Okay, so that top one says that a Gen Z parent is 34% higher focus on their own personal career than a millennial parent. So, as you look over this list of these biggest emotional markers versus of Gen Z versus millennials, the thing that struck me is how often the word me, my, and I shows up, and how infrequently the word kid shows up. It's not in there. You know what I mean? They are very focused on their personal career. They're very focused on their amusement and to have a playful and young at heart experience. They're very focused on getting love from the world around them. And it's not until you get close to the bottom of the list that you see the word kid. And at that point, it's not about my kid's welfare or emotional health. It's like, we just let my kid be a kid.
Right.
Okay. So now, just to be clear, this is not me sort of saying these are a bunch of negligent parents. I think this is great. and to be clear, this is not, they are not, their kid priorities on an absolute level are their top priorities. So this is not like they're completely putting their kid on a self-feeder and hoping for the best. But what it is saying is that they are balancing their needs and their kids' needs in a very, very different way. That the world of helicopter parenting is like coming to a crashing halt, because these parents are going to insist on personal happiness and asking for help way faster than millennials are. And if you go to the next page, you'll see the reverse view of it for a millennial. So this is what's higher for a millennial mom or a dad versus a Gen Z mom or a dad. And what you can see here is like the word kid appears in almost every one of these things. They're just much more focused on all things child, whether it be their kid's happiness or their kid's problem-solving skills, their kid's curiosity, kid, all the way through this.
Well, and George, I think this dovetails beautifully with what we're seeing with Gen Alpha too, and how they are as a generation, and that the amount of data that they've received, ultimately from like day one, the most connected generation we've seen yet, that they are more independent, and they are, striving to have that independence of voice, of action, much sooner than children in previous generations. So I think this is makes total sense.
And I think a lot of that's really good news. I think unfortunately some of it is not good news. When you look at like the quickest rising dominant emotional priorities of Gen Alpha, it's stuff like learn how to make money. And my own survival skills. And I'm not really sure that 8-year-olds should be focused.
No, I agree.
But they're going to be tough. But they're going to be
independent. We'll go with independent.
Independent in a way that their predecessors weren't.
Yeah.
So anyway, so this is the human, or I shouldn't say quite so absolutely, because there's plenty of older parents that have young children, but prepare yourself because this is the emerging generation of parents, and they feel things really differently from their millennials or their Gen X counterparts. And you see this stuff, and now if we go into the next slide here, you see this stuff really playing into their notions of quality content. So there's a lot that we could talk about. I've just picked out 5 things that I think are kind of interesting, and we'll go through those and then kind of open it up for everyone to talk about this stuff. So the first one on the next page, I think there's something interesting here, which is actually a few things I would say on this page, which is, first of all, despite this vastly, impossibly cluttered world of preschool content, I don't even know how many shows there are. I can't keep track of them. There's a new one that gets greenlit every single day. Despite all this clutter, all from a parent's point of view and an emotional point of view, it all boils down to 7 things. That's it. When it comes to quality and content, this is the check boxes that you're going to have to find a way of delivering on. And the other thing I would say about these 7 emotional jobs of quality content is that it really does begin to speak to some of the heavy lifting of parenthood. And I don't mean to sort of go back to that Gen Z thing of, yeah, they're looking for help, but I think they are looking for help, as I would be also if I was dealing with child rearing in this day and age. But the first one speaks to family bonding. This is kid content, for my 5-year-old, that is about creating cohesion and strength and unity within the family through unconditional love between the parent and the child. And we'll get to talk about sizing in a second here. The second one is about content in the stores. Oopsie, if you go back just for 1 sec. Core values. This is timeless values like goodness, character, and honesty. Self-reliance. Susie, this is what you were just speaking about. Again, this is a 5-year-old. A self-reliant 5-year-old. That's kind of, to me, a little bit of a weird idea. But there you have it. And I think again with Gen Z parents saying, hey, I mean playing pickleball. My kids gotta be able to deal with their own stuff. Self-love, imagination, discovery. Then you get this idea of cozy comforts, content that makes my kid feel safe and nurtured in a kind of a stressful world. And then the final one is dealing with stress. So those are the 7, when we factor analyzed all those passion points around this idea of what are the essential elements of quality content, it was these 7 themes. And now, Susie, if you could go to the next page, this will give you a little bit of an idea on sizing. It's interesting. I mean, these are basically similar size. This is not like one's much, much bigger than the other, but there are differences. When you can see what's on the far left-hand side of this chart, it's pretty much the essential stuff that this child's going to need to survive. Right? This idea, if you aren't loving yourself as a child, if you don't believe in yourself and have resilience and some emotional fortitude to go with that, it's going to be tough sledding for you. Mm-hmm. The core values, I think this is a really interesting one because some of these values you'd expect, like honesty and determination. Other ones like safety, like I don't even think of that as a core value, but what parents are saying to us now is it's not enough to just have safe content. I want content that teaches my kid how to be safe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And some people may say, you know what, fine, we're not going to do that. I'm not sure how I would do that without scaring kids on my TV show. And like, I don't know if you all saw that article or the thing in the press this morning about back to school supplies and bulletproof backpacks. Did you see that one?
I did.
So that's like this, the kid can put the backpack up here in case there's a shooter that comes into their classroom. So, I'm not sure you won't necessarily want to get on that on Nickelodeon, but it is where moms and dads' head is in terms of putting this as a thing for their kids' content for their 5-year-old.
Well, I don't think you can't be, right, given the world that we're living in, especially in the U.S. So that's what makes it so heartbreaking to even see those things on a chart. And I think it's also digital safety. That's something I think about as a parent as well. So it's safety on so many levels.
So many levels. And then you get into wonder, imagination, discovery, and that's, things about discovering their strengths and passions and optimism and imagination. Self-reliance. This is kids who can care for themselves. And again, these are 3-year-olds, self-reliance, but it's already popped up as an element of quality and content. Then family bonding, and then like kind of the fun stuff of relaxation and having good friends and so on. And that one is a lot smaller than the biggest one. So by the time you got down to the right-hand side of this, you're into a 15 percentage point difference, and those are significant differences. So this idea of like, if you can do something through your content to fortify and buttress my kid against the waves of this world that they're going to face through self-love and core values and imaginative outlook on life, you're going to find a very receptive ear among these parents. The third piece on the next page that we thought was pretty interesting was just how much these can vary by life stage. Okay, so this is looking at one of those individual areas that I just spoke about. This is core values. And again, there's some of these passion points that live within that factor that are true across all life stages. And by that, I mean from 2-year-olds up to 12-year-olds. But there's differences also. So when you talk about core values to the parent of a 2 to 5-year-old, it's content that helps them, as we talked about earlier, deal with real life threats. You get to the parent of a 6 to 8-year-old, their notions and defining elements of this idea of core values is about perseverance. And when you get to the parent of a 9 to 12-year-old, core values switches to this idea of problem-solving skills. So there are really important kind of age and stage differences that parents kind of work their way through as their child goes from being a 2-year-old to a 7-year-old to a 10-year-old, which you should be aware of. The fourth thing on the next page, this kind of blew me away because we also asked parents, all right, tell us the extent to which you're satisfied with the amount of content that's already out there in each one of these areas. And despite the clutter, and despite all the new shows that seem to be coming out every single day, only about half of parents are satisfied with what's out there. That's a small number. Given how many people there are like taking a swing at quality content, only half of the parents are find that there's an abundant supply of shows which do a really good job on each one of these 7 different elements.
And dealing with stress for 2 to 5, that's 0.
Oh yeah, no, sorry, that wasn't a factor for the for that age group.
It's interesting because I've been looking. We did a report on this, but climate literacy and eco-anxiety, and I feel that the climate is affecting really young kids when they can see stuff going on. I think that will become, a point that hopefully we'll get to start tracking. Yeah.
There's no question. And one of the things, just if you could quickly back up, Susie, 2 slides that I want to mention on this one. Who's read Sherlock Holmes and knows the expression, the dog that didn't bark? Like what's not on this page? School and education.
Yeah.
Is nowhere on this page. Curricular preparation is nowhere on this page. And 7 years ago, it was like one of the number 1 things on this page, at least for content. We didn't have quality content then. Anyway, if we roll back a little bit forward.
I think that's a true reflection of where we are in the world.
Sure it is.
Yeah.
It sure is. But like math and science shows, I'm not so sure that's the play right now. And then the last piece of this, in terms of like people's views of what's abundant, there's huge differences in the level of satisfaction across multicultural segments. So if you're a Black parent, you are much more likely to think there's an adequate supply of programs that live in that gold standard of quality content than if you're a white parent. And if you're a white parent, you are much more likely to be satisfied than a Hispanic parent. Hispanic parents are way down at the bottom here in terms of their level of satisfaction. And given an audience which is now 30% of the population, as we all know, and growing very, very rapidly, that's something for us to really, really pay attention to. Is like, why is that?
Right.
Like, what are we not getting about the Hispanic parent mindset that leaves them so underwhelmed by these dozens and dozens of shows that are out there for their preschooler? Because it's not quite working for them. And you can see on the right-hand side, their level of satisfaction with some of these individual passion points around quality content. We're really undersatisfied with shows to able to sort of work on some of those core values, like honesty and good people. And raising kids who can care for themselves. And it really raises questions about, like, are we applying kind of a white lens to character development? What are the differences in how character is formed through the lens of a Hispanic mother or father versus a Black mother or father versus a white mother or father? Because there's something going wrong here that the industry isn't quite getting. And given the size of the market, it's something we've got to get our arms around. I
will add that we had a Hispanic Heritage Month panel last week, and it was truly insightful to understand what's missing. So That's available, guys. Go watch
Yeah.
but
we're up to studying. We're now up to studying 9 different multicultural segments.
yeah,
in the
we
US.
just have to. It's a world, and we need to see that representation and those stories and those cultures and all of that.
That's right. So those are the 5 takeaways, or 5 of the takeaways that I want to just preview here. And I think that's the next slide, Susie. I think hopefully those of you who are listening can begin to see some of the applications here. If you're a content developer, this is kind of the voice of the ultimate gatekeeper on what they expect out of you in terms of quality content, and hopefully it'll give you some really good direction on, man, are we covering these things in the way that a mother and a father have asked us to? As you design platforms and think about what to show and what to put, this is a really good checklist for that. And again, for the people who are part of this research, and of course, you're welcome to join us if you'd like. We can put your brands in here or your platform, and we can show you exactly where you're doing well and where you have outages, either at a show level or a brand level or a platform level, and give you really good guidance on how you can be a more complete partner of moms and dads based on this new gold standard. So I think that's what I had to share. Let me just stop talking and.
When does the full report come out so that people?
It's out.
It's out. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. We will share that too, guys. So I think one thing I'd love to talk about are these are sort of, some of the highlights that George has talked about here tonight, but I'd love to throw it to Andrea. You've partnered with the Family Room before. You've used this data to inform what you guys are doing at NIC, and I'd just love for you to color that in an application, process, and how it compares to some of the hard numbers, how the soft, kind of qualitative research. How does it all fit in there to help guide you guys?
Yeah, sure. George, I've almost lost track of how many years we've been subscribing at this point. It's been a long time.
Right?
I'm sorry?
I think that'd be gray hair. I know that.
Yeah, well, I had the gray hair. But I think that for us, it's been incredibly valuable when, as George talked about, from a development standpoint, obviously, we can, as we're thinking, we do a ton of our own content research, testing specific content. But it's really valuable to see both what kids and parents are actually looking for in content. And as George talked about, not seeing education as a top priority, even for preschoolers. I've been at Nickelodeon for a really long time. And that was the be all and the end all, right? You had to make it educational, but of course, entertaining also so that the kids would want to stick with it. And now we've seen over time the evolution of what educational means to parents. And that used to be exclusively academic. And that really has broadened quite a bit. And so we're seeing so much more in terms of the social emotional and now the kinds of things like grit and perseverance and problem solving and things like that. And so that's incredibly helpful as we are thinking about the kinds of shows that we're going to develop and also thinking about how we tweak those shows to make them as powerful as they can be, both for the kids and the parents, but also from a marketing perspective. Yeah. What are we saying about our content? It's going to be particularly, that's more, I guess for the parents potentially than it is on the kids side.
Right.
And even as we think about, again, across platforms, hearing about the family bonding piece, and this is George and I and the others at Family Room and at Nickelodeon, we've had a lot of conversations around COVID and the impact of that and how much that changed viewing habits in so many different ways. And, seeing younger kids watching up and older kids watching down and co-viewing now being like on steroids. And, what is that going to look like down the road? And this notion of family bonding as we think about all the work that we're doing and the potential nostalgia play. And thinking about the content that gets put onto Paramount Plus and thinking about what is the opportunity there if parents are truly valuing that family bonding. What about that old Nickelodeon content? We're at a point now where that first generation of Nick kids are parents.
Yeah.
And so what kind of content do they want to be watching and introducing to their kids? And so how do we take advantage of that? And because we are subscribers, we can be looking specifically at our brand as well. And so we're able to see where we're doing well and where maybe those shortcomings are so that we can make some adjustments. But even just going beyond the broader passion points piece, and this content piece is brand new, but we've been working just in general with passion points, and it's been great for us to help us understand some of the findings that we have in our own primary research. And so, there was a big study that's one of my colleagues at Nick was working on emotional lives of kids and families, and really trying to understand and fill in some of the gaps or help us understand some of the data that we were seeing by looking at the passion points. And then particularly also being able to look at those passion points broken out. We are forever looking at everything broken out by race and ethnicity because there are such differences, and being able to go back to George and his team and saying like, well, hold on a second. What does this look like if we're looking at Hispanic parents? That's a big focus for us as we have, particularly in the preschool space with a new Dora coming out, wanting to know how are Hispanic parents different than white parents or Black parents. So, we're forever coming back with lots of questions, challenging these
That's
guys.
one of the cool things that for me, with our work with Nickelodeon that I found so cool is that this study makes it really clear that there's nothing to be apologetic about, but just liberating kid delight and joy in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow that seems like privilege to some people, like, oh, you have to have, and it's not that. Nick does some really great things on behalf of children, but one of them is letting them be kids.
Right.
And what this quality content model says is that, man, that you can't do much better for kids than that.
No, I agree. Letting kids be kids is, to me, as a parent, has always been a priority. I have one kid that always wants to grow up quickly, and I have one that would love to stay as young as possible for as long as possible. I love that. So, Andrea, one quick question. Of all, you guys shared that you'd worked together for some years. Beyond the educational note, what were some of the other sort of colorations on maybe data that you had or that you learned through George's research that really surprised you or caught you, like,
well, I think we've talked a lot actually about parents, because we've done at Nickelodeon, we've done our own studies on, we had A Story of Me, Story of Us, which was Story of Families. We've talked about generations of parents, and we sort of were thinking, over the years, we kept saying, when is that pendulum going to swing back, right? Because there was that point where parents were so almost obsessive about their kids, and everything was, the family was a completely kid-centric household, and everything was about the kids. And then you kind of wondered, well, when does that shift? And I remember, some of the conversations that we had in Passion Points, particularly during COVID, and that recognition of, we saw these big shifts, and parents, as George was explaining it, recognizing, kind of using that airplane metaphor, that you have to put on your own oxygen mask
first,
before you can help others, and recognizing that parents were suddenly realizing, oh my God, I need to take care of myself in order to take care of my family. And that was kind of the first inklings of like, are things shifting? And now seeing what you shared earlier, George, in terms of the differences between, the Gen Z parent and the millennial parent, in terms of how much are they putting themselves a little bit first, and not by no means to the neglect of their children, of course, but really recognizing, their own, how much they are important. And even it's great to see some of that playfulness too, in terms of, for us as a brand, when I think about what Nickelodeon wants to be able to do for kids as well as for their parents and even for young adults. So I think that was really a great piece that helped us understand family dynamic.
I love that. Yeah. I also think, parenting as a whole, and the whole, as we've said, helicopter parenting, I think that was a detriment, for my personal opinion, is a detriment to kids and parents. So I love seeing that swing and giving the kids a little bit of space and independence to really grow and to thrive. So, All right, Alyssa, let us hear from the SEL expert on the panel tonight. We just love, top line thoughts on everything that you've heard so far today, but also just, since this is sort of your key focus, how does all of this additional sort of points of reference and information and insights help us all better understand SEL in general, and therefore its application to all forms of media?
Well, first, George, I find this absolutely fascinating. So as I'm going through, I read the slides ahead of time, but hearing you talk through them, it was very eye-opening. I think the data is very helpful. And I think one of the things that we're seeing in the world of social emotional learning post-COVID is this prioritization of non-academic skills and the importance of how that underpins success for everybody, adults and kids alike. And so I'm sort of seeing this reflected also in your data of, we're shifting away from that school mindset, that academic mindset, that everything must be about teaching students academic skills, but we haven't fully left the idea that we are still teaching students skills and kids skills, right? These are very tangible skills. These are very important skills. These are just different skills that truly are the foundation for learning. So it might be that folks are coming around to that more. I mean, the research certainly shows at the in the school setting that is crucially important to the success of students in schools, is having these foundational school skills and developing them. And I'm also really interested, and I would love to pick this apart. I'm not sure how, given the time we have tonight, but in my work, I have this unbelievable privilege of walking into schools and districts and speaking with families and teachers and administrators and kids and asking what's important to you. But I don't have data quite like this. And one of the things I found is that a lot of folks are saying that these skills, and a lot of people like to mince words or mix up their words and say they're non-cognitive skills. I think these are very cognitive skills. Being able to be self-reliant is a very cognitive skill. Being able to have self-love, these are very cognitive skills. They're just non-academic skills. And so thinking about how a lot of the feedback I'm receiving at the school level is that adults like our millennial parents, we were never taught this. This was not taught in schools. This wasn't taught through our content when we were watching TV. And these were not skills that were highlighted or really brought to the surface. So now a lot of folks feel sort of at a loss for how to teach these skills that they know are crucially important for our kids and their success. And so I'm wondering if maybe that's what we're seeing with the shift in the reflection on that generational piece of there is now this recognition of what skills are important for kids and how early it's important to start to teach these skills. But maybe parents are a bit at a loss of how to do that. Just like their teachers are at a loss of how to do that because schools didn't prioritize it, our content didn't prioritize it, and we're looking for the gap to be filled. And so I just wonder if that pattern is repeating itself.
I think you're on something, Alyssa. That's a really good point. Our next thing that we're going to be adding to our work is like where does education happen now, and how is that different from where it was before? We'll be getting deeply into the different modalities of educating kids as more and more moms and dads don't trust public education anymore. Mm-hmm. And these surging rates of homeschooling and microschooling and pod schooling, and there's a bunch of them. But I think it's all reflective of the fact that just like you said, we're at a loss to where to get these skills. And again, I guess coming back to the audience of this podcast or of this session, man, I don't think public schools are going to change very fast on this topic, but the media industry can.
Right.
And I think that the more that you can sort of have your ear to the ground about what these moms and dads are asking for, because as you said, Susie, that's like the front line.
Yeah.
I think this stuff will make its way into the pedagogy of educational, expertise at some point, but they're crying out for help right now. And with only half of these moms and dads satisfied with the amount of content in these areas, I just think that there's some serious pivoting that's going to need to happen. But for the fast pivoters, there's going to be a huge new set of parents that are very receptive to your product.
And it sounds like there's tremendous opportunity from what you're presenting.
Yeah, I mean, and parents aren't trusting, and they want resources, and they want to educate their kids, but they don't know how.
Right.
I mean, Nickelodeon gets involved in some of that. I mean, we have Nick Helps, which is providing resources for parents to help them and for kids, but to help them. How do you have some of those tough conversations, and how do you teach kids about things like discrimination?
Right.
You know,
And if schools aren't the places where you turn, are trusted brands places
Right.
that can be resources for families
Mhm.
and can both work in tandem. I mean, I think about, I did just last week, I did a 3-day visit to a district, and I spent all my days walking through classes. And the number of classes I walked into where some video content was playing for the kids, and this was all ages. I saw pre-K, I think we started at 3-year-olds to 12th graders. There was a tremendous amount of content that was being shown in the classroom. So that's outside of the home. So, parents aren't your only target audience here. There's, educators are also looking for resources. We know that this is what parents want. Teachers want to be in line with parents, and they want to teach important skills to their students. And they want, in general, we all want student growth over time. And so thinking about kids, as one consumer, thinking about parents as one consumer, but our education system uses all of these resources as well.
Yeah, I also have been doing a ton of research. We've done a couple of panels on it at CMA too, but I think the other area that is really blooming in schools is audio, and having kids learn through audio. And your point in terms of, teachers are now have Gen Alphas in the classroom who are very digitally knowledgeable and accepting of technology, and they're not going to listen to a teacher for an hour go on about a topic. They're going to want to interact, and they're going to learn from application much quicker than, when I grew up, and had to sit there and be polite, always wiggling in my seat, wanting to do more, but, and I just think that that's one way that I think media brands can figure it out, is whether it's Google Classroom or some other format, how do you bridge that gap into the classroom to create content that is engaging, teaching, and making learning fun. I think that's something that I'm definitely trying to figure out as a producer, because I think hiding the broccoli really isn't the philosophy anymore. It's more about just the whole child and having it all be a fun and passionate journey for them to grow, to learn on multiple levels.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And to piggyback off of that, I think that being said, there's a tremendous range in what skills can be taught, both at home and in schools, but across all content.
Yeah.
When we're thinking about, tapping into some of these opportunities that we're seeing, it's so helpful to have a guide the way that it's laid out for us to say, what do we prioritize? Because there are numerous sort of directions we can take this, and understanding what families want is really important, but also thinking about maybe even language as a place for continued questioning, and thinking about how can we be very specific about the language of the questions we're asking, so that we can get as much information from our surveys that we possibly can. So if we're looking at self-reliance, what does that mean? If we're talking about emotions, what does that mean? And drilling down, because I do think that we have limited sort of vocabulary when it comes to some of these ideas. When it comes to, when we talk about social and emotional learning, that is like a huge nebulous term that has a million different definitions, right? And until we're
interpretations
and depending on who's doing the research, right? It looks different. And so if we're able to really think about how we want to streamline that and ask very specific questions of folks, we can get a lot of great information on exactly what we want to, where we want to take this. So what does it mean to model, excellent social interactions and for students to feel safe in those? How does that look different from emotional safety? And what language surrounds that? What does that mean? What does it mean for students when we're talking about Maslow's hierarchy? I mean, even that in and of itself, there is so much loaded language there. And the more we can tease that out and make it accessible, make it explicit for folks, I think, and speak the same language, I think that is really an area for growth.
It's so interesting. We keep getting asked, Children's Media Association keeps getting asked, and I don't know if this is the right word or, how we figure this out, but what comes to mind is the idea of some sort of playbook, right? So you have to take all of these pieces of the puzzle and put it together in a digestible format so people can really act against it. And I do think those things are missing in the industry. So we have to figure out how to build those in a way that is fluid, because things are changing, as George will attest daily with everything going on in the world. But, how do we come together as an industry, developing media, to create consensus on some of this, while adding all of the different colors in there so that we can figure out the best ways to maximize it across different mediums. I think that's something that we keep getting asked for, like, can you create a playbook about this? Can you create one was about climate literacy, one was about something else for Gen Alpha that we're working on. So super interesting, because I do think there's all this amazing research, George, obviously yours right out there. And how do we do that translation, and create those bites, those guidelines, whatever we call them, to help everyone.
Yeah. Alyssa, I'm curious whether if I could ask you a question, what you made of that Hispanic data? Like, do you have a point of view on why Hispanics would be so much less satisfied with?
Well, I do. Someone who was watching asked if language barrier could possibly be a component of that. And I don't know the answer. I certainly, I don't do enough research on that topic to understand, but I think that was a very thoughtful question, and one that I would be interested in hearing more about.
Yeah.
It may also just be about representation.
I agree.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think often it's representation.
What do you know about that, Andrea? Like, when you say that?
Well, I think that if, it's important for kids to see people who look like them, and they're only going to, or they're going to learn more, they're going to connect more, engage more, if in fact they're seeing that. And unfortunately, I mean, in all the years, 20 plus years ago when I started Nickelodeon and looking at content analyses, and you would see that we'd keep talking about how Hispanics were underrepresented in the media. And here we are all these many years later. And yes, perhaps the percentage of, the composition of white characters has gone down, but we're seeing that the people of color, it's much more representation that you're seeing for Black characters than you are for Hispanic. And so we're still in that same space where Hispanic kids are just feeling unseen.
And we gleaned from the panel last week that authentic representation was another factor. That the sort of, I don't know how it all happens, but maybe people developing some of the content, you needed authentic Hispanic or Latin people developing the content for their own people. That it's interesting and fascinating to all of us, but you need that authenticity, is what sort of came out of last week's panel.
That, to me, I think was the piece I was going to bring up is who is developing the content, and really understanding that cultural norms are so different and significant in every community. And even saying Hispanic or Latino, that is a very general representation of people. And so even the folks who check a box may have varying different opinions, cultural understandings of the world, lenses in which they view content. And so just thinking about how to diversify the folks who are on the back end of content creation, so that shows through in the content that that folks see. I also think, and this is true across all races, is as we're moving to new generations, I think people are a little bit disillusioned by this like fit in a box category.
I agree.
Of like I am this, so therefore I like to watch this. And so I'm really interested to see how that changes over time of what does it look like to really diversify our content, but in a very genuine way. Because I think kids are craving that. I think, as we've seen in years and years, families don't look like the families they did 50 years ago. And that's wonderful and amazing. And seeing that on in our content and reflected is going to be, I think, really powerful for folks. But I'm also wondering too, just specifically around that idea of asking folks for feedback, but potentially not understanding who we're asking for feedback is an important piece too.
Yeah. I also think, especially in today's world, obviously there's lots of children out there that are mixed race too, and how we also highly resonate their content so they see themselves, because I think we're getting better at representation. I think there's this long way to go, but I think we are getting better. But then it's also people that identify with multiple races and how they see themselves too is going to be really important.
Yeah.
I'm going to share a couple of questions. Would you say there is an Anglo-centric element to the dissatisfaction of the Hispanic viewers? And I think we just sort of addressed that and said, yes.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to add anything?
Well, I think if I could just add a little element to Eva's thing there, the most rapid change over the last 5 years have been among white parents. I mean, this is a terrible generalization, and don't hit me for it, but for a lot of disadvantaged parents, many of whom are people of color, life's always been tough. And yes, it got a little worse during COVID, but it was the people that had always been a little immune to the difficulties of the world that really changed. And so a lot of the movement that I've shown you in that data was from white families.
I can also, one other piece that I'm just remembering from your slide is there were specific points under each section that were that folks were more or less dissatisfied in that category. And something I've found working with a variety of families across several cities and different communities is sometimes their definition of a certain behavior or a certain action is different. So I saw the word honesty, for example. That might look different in different communities. Maybe we're not honoring that. Yeah. So maybe families are seeing one definition, probably the Anglo-centric definition of what honesty looks like on television. Yeah. And that doesn't fully represent their community's definition of what that word truly means.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that too. Love that. Okay, we are almost out of time. I think I'll share one lovely comment from another watcher that she really felt affirmed in her efforts. So that's good. We did our job, guys.
Shout out to the social workers in the room.
Exactly. And I just wanted to thank all of you. George, leading with you, thank you for doing this invaluable research. Andrea, Alyssa, thank you for joining us and adding such a wonderful color to this conversation. We appreciate all of you and the work that you do. We really feel it's invaluable to us as media developers to continue to grow and learn with all of this important information. So thank you very much. Thanks for everyone that joined us, and more to come in coming weeks with more panels. But that's it for tonight. Thank you, everyone.
Good night. Thanks for having us.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a great night.